Hello everyone, welcome to Deep Sight. Last time we discussed Napoleon's Italian campaign. Today, let's continue following Napoleon's rise to power and embark on this journey through time. Let's unfold this magnificent historical panorama together and see how Napoleon rose to the pinnacle of power from the ruins of the Bourbon dynasty, reshaped France, and made it the dominant power in Europe, becoming a new generation of hegemon. After the Italian campaign, Napoleon was already a key figure in French military and political power. He was quickly appointed commander of the Legion of England. On December 25, 1797, Christmas Day, he was elected a member of the French Academy. On February 23, 1798, he reported to the Directory that the plan to force a landing in Britain was not feasible and had a low success rate. He also proposed 3 alternative plans. The Directory ultimately chose an expedition to Egypt, hoping to use it to threaten trade between Britain and British India. On March 5th, the Directory entrusted Napoleon with the preparation and command of this expedition. Napoleon was particularly excited about conquering Egypt and restoring French hegemony in India. After 2.5 months of preparation, the Orient Army was formed, totaling 38,000 men with 171 cannons, divided into 14 infantry brigades and 7 cavalry regiments. The infantry was organized into 5 divisions, commanded by several capable generals: Jean-Baptiste Kleber, Louis Desailly, Louis-André Bon, Jacques-François Menu, and Jean Renier. The cavalry divisions were commanded by Thomas Alexander Dumas. Admiral de Garlier led the Mediterranean squadron for transport. Napoleon also brought 167 scholars with him and 125 books with him. The Orient Army's journey was both a conquest and arduous. They departed from Toulon on May 19th, meeting up with a supply convoy en route. Arriving on Malta on June 9th, the Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller allowed them to resupply with fresh water but restricted the number of ships entering the port. As a result, Napoleon launched a massive offensive the following day, sweeping through the island and easily establishing a republic. The fleet continued its advance, fortunately avoiding Nelson's British fleet. They arrived at Alexandria on the morning of July 1st, and by 3 p.m. the following day, the French army advanced towards Alexandria in 3 columns, capturing the entire city that evening. On July 6th, the French reached Manchuria, and on the 10th, they advanced to Lamina on the Nile. On July 11th, the Duga Division, replacing the wounded Kleber, along with the river convoy, also arrived in Lamina. On July 13th, the French attacked southwards at Cobrak, with 5 divisions forming infantry phalanxes that easily defeated the Mamluk forces. The French army then marched along the west bank of the Nile towards Cairo, encountering the main Mamluk force near the village of Mbabe. On the west bank were 6,000 Mamluk cavalry, 20,000 Egyptian infantry, and later 14,000 Arab cavalry, led by Murad Bey. On the east bank were 6,000 Mamluk cavalry and 14,000 Egyptian infantry, led by Ibrahim Bey. On July 21st, the Battle of the Pyramids began. The French army on the west bank formed 5 hollow squares. Murad Bey ordered his cavalry to attack the Desailly and Renier's squares on the right flank, but after heavy losses, they were forced to retreat. Simultaneously, the Bon and Vires squares on the left flank became attack columns, storming into Mbabe, annihilating the local 2,000 defenders and controlling the river. On July 24th, the French army marched into Cairo. Murad Bey retreated to Upper Egypt, while Ibrahim Bey retreated to Syria. However, after the British Navy inflicted a heavy blow on the French fleet at the mouth of the Nile, the Eastern Expeditionary Force was cut off from its homeland, and the situation deteriorated rapidly. In December 1798, the French learned that the Ottoman Empire was preparing to attack Egypt via Syria and the Mediterranean. Napoleon decided to strike first, leading 13,000 men out of Egypt on February 5, 1799. On February 19th, they captured Arish and then Gaza. On March 3rd, they reached the outskirts of Jaffa, and on March 7th, they launched a fierce attack, breaking through the defenders' lines and capturing over 2,000 Ottoman soldiers. Considering the potential repercussions of releasing or taking the prisoners, Napoleon ordered them all executed. On March 17th, the French advanced to the walls of Acre, but the city walls were strong and equipped with 250 cannons. Lacking heavy siege artillery, the French infantry's attack was futile. Later, Napoleon learned that the Ottoman army was gathering in Galilee and sent Junot with cavalry to scout the area. In early April, realizing the enemy's forces far outnumbered his own, he sent Kleber's troops to reinforce Junot. On April 16th, Kleber led about 2,000 men to fight 35,000 Ottoman troops at the Tavor Mountains. The French army was in dire straits a day later, but Napoleon arrived in time, maneuvering behind the Ottoman lines and driving the enemy towards Jordan. At this time, a plague spread through the French army, and Napoleon learned that the Ottoman army would land in Egypt with the help of the British Navy. Therefore, on May 20th, he ordered a retreat. Back in Egypt, an Ottoman army of 20,000 landed at Abu Qir in mid-July, forming two lines. On July 25th, Napoleon ordered two infantry divisions to attack the first line of enemy fortifications, while Murat led cavalry in a charge into the center, quickly destroying the fortifications on both flanks of the first line. The French infantry advanced, artillery blasted through the enemy lines, and cavalry crossed the second line to attack the remaining enemy troops from the rear, completely crushing the Ottoman army. In this battle, the Ottoman army suffered 9,000 casualties, killed, captured, and missing, and another 11,000 drowned. In August, Napoleon learned from British Commodore Sidney Smith that European nations, led by Tsar Paul I of Russia, had once again formed an anti-French coalition. France had lost Italy, was facing difficulties on the Rhine front, and was experiencing internal divisions. Believing he could play a greater role in France, Napoleon unilaterally relinquished command of the expeditionary force to Kleber and boarded ships to return to France on the night of August 22nd to 23rd. The two ships evaded the British naval blockade, stopped at Corsica, and finally returned to France on October 9th. When Napoleon arrived in France in October 1799, he was greeted with cheers and respect from the people. By this time, the internal and external situation in France had improved. Massena had won the Battle of Zurich, Brune had defeated the Anglo-Russian expeditionary force in the Netherlands, and Russia had withdrawn from the Second Coalition against France. However, the Directory's incompetence had deeply penetrated public opinion, and Napoleon was seen as a potential threat and replacement by Siècles, Ducos, Talleyrand, Fouché, and others. Napoleon and his allies then plotted a coup, uniting forces in the Paris region. On November 9, 1799, the 18th of Brumaire in the Republican calendar, the Senate, citing rumors of possible attacks on its members, voted to move both houses from the Tuileries Palace to the St. Cloud Palace, appointing Napoleon to carry out this decision and handing him command of the Paris troops. The Directory was stripped of its power. Barras signed his resignation, while Goyer and Moulin resigned after being arrested by Moreau. On the 19th of Brumaire, Napoleon arrived at the St. Cloud Palace to address the assembly. The Senate of Elders reacted coldly, while the House of 500 was enraged, shouting, "Down with the tyrant," and surrounding him, pushing and shoving him out of the chamber. His brother, Lucien Bonaparte, claimed that some members had been bribed by the British with gold and immediately called in the parliamentary guard to clear the assembly. A few hours later, some members of parliament were summoned back to a meeting and voted to suspend the legislature for 6 weeks. During the recess, Sise, Dick, and Napoleon formed a provisional government, thus ending the Directory. Napoleon then launched a second coup, destroying Sise's draft constitution and seizing absolute power. On December 24, 1799, the provisional government promulgated the Constitution of the 8th year of the Republic. Napoleon seized supreme power, becoming First Consul, and controlled the executive branch, able to enact laws, appoint and dismiss officials and military officers, and was not subject to legislative oversight. On February 17, 1800, Lucien announced the results of the constitutional referendum. 3,011,007 voted in favor, and only 1,562 voted against. Napoleon explicitly protected property rights in the Constitution to win over merchants and employers. He established a national gendarme, implemented judicial reforms, and cracked down on bandits. He did not thoroughly purge the previous regime. Most of the members of parliament from the Directory period were incorporated into the government, and he actively recruited talent from various political parties. He also persuaded exiles to return home and sought the support of the old aristocracy. Through a two-pronged approach of pardons and the elimination of leaders, he quelled a serious royalist rebellion in southwestern France. On January 17, 1800, he forcefully closed 60 of the country's 73 newspapers, completely controlling public opinion. First Constituency, Reforms, and Wars. Battle of Marengo. On January 25, 1800, Napoleon proposed to his Minister of War, Louis Alexander Berthier, the idea of forming a 60,000-strong reserve corps to prepare for war in Dijon in preparation for the recapture of northern Italy. In April, to mislead foreign spies, Napoleon deliberately held a public review in Dijon of a temporary force composed of old, weak, disabled soldiers and new recruits. The propaganda machine was activated, convincing the anti-French coalition that the reserve corps was incapable of fighting. On May 6, Napoleon left Paris for Geneva and Lausanne. On May 14, he ordered the reserve corps, nominally under Berthier's command, to advance south, cross the rugged, snow-covered Great St. Bernard Pass, and march north across the Alps into Italy. Four other units were also deployed in support. On May 27, the French vanguard, Lanz's forces, captured the Aosta Valley and defeated Austrian infantry regiments at Chatillon, but were subsequently blocked by the Austrian garrison at Bart. The infantry advanced first and captured Ivrea downstream, while most of the artillery remained behind. On June 2nd, the fortress surrendered after the arrival of the 5th Division of Chabron. On May 26th, Napoleon arrived at Ivrea and devised 3 offensive plans. After analysis, he decided on the third plan, a direct march to Milan to seize the Austrian supply base and join forces with Mott's. On June 1st, the French army crossed the Ticino River, defeating the Vukasovic division on the march and forcing it to retreat towards Bergamo. On June 2nd, Napoleon re-entered Milan in triumph, occupying towns such as Pavia and Brescia, thus dividing the Austrian army in Italy. Upon learning of the fall of Genoa, Napoleon immediately launched an attack. On June 9th, Lanz attacked the Austrian army in Castaggio, fiercely defending against superior forces until Victor's reinforcements arrived, driving the Austrians back to Montebello. On June 13th, Napoleon's troops had crossed the Scriva River. He deduced that the Austrian commander, Melas, intended to retreat to Genoa, so he dispatched a reserve force under the command of Decisive to Serravalle to block the route from Alessandria to Genoa. On the afternoon of the 13th, the French vanguard arrived at the Marengo plain and, after fierce fighting, drove the Austrians across the river. Due to a false report that the bridge had been destroyed after the Austrians crossed, Napoleon mistakenly concluded that Melas had completely abandoned his eastward advance. At 9 a.m. on the 14th, the Austrian army stationed in Alexandria crossed the Bormida River, driving the French out of Marengo. However, Kellerman's heavy cavalry brigade arrived in time and repelled the advancing Austrian army. At 10 a.m., the Austrian army attacked again, capturing the village of Castelcuriolo. Napoleon deployed the consulate guard to reinforce the right flank and sent the reserve Monnier division to retake the village. At 11 a.m., Napoleon urgently ordered Decisive to march rapidly towards Marengo. At this time, the numerically superior Austrian army continued to charge the French army, which fought and retreated, barely maintaining its formation. At 5 p.m., Decisive's troops arrived on the battlefield and immediately launched a counterattack under artillery cover. Kellerman led 400 heavy cavalrymen in a flank charge, cutting the enemy in two and crushing the morale of the Austrian army. In the Battle of Marengo, the Austrian army suffered 963 dead, 5,518 wounded, and 2,921 captured. While the exact number of French casualties is not recorded, Decisive was tragically killed in action. Although grieving, Napoleon, for political purposes, fabricated Decisive's last words and account of the battle. On June 15th, the two sides signed the Treaty of Alexandria, and Melas withdrew east of the Mincio River. After the battle, Napoleon began implementing political reforms. He quickly negotiated peace with the anti-French coalition, focusing his efforts on domestic reforms to consolidate his power base. However, negotiations with Austria were unsuccessful, and after the armistice expired, hostilities resumed, shifting to the German and Italian fronts. On December 3, 1800, Moreau defeated the Austrian army at the Battle of Hohenlinden, rendering the anti-French coalition unable to continue fighting. On the evening of December 24th, as Napoleon's convoy passed through Rue Saint-Nicolson, a bomb exploded nearby, killing 5 and wounding 26. Although the assassination was attributed to royalists, Napoleon accused the Jacobins of being the masterminds and launched a major purge of Jacobins within the country. On February 9, 1801, France and Austria signed the Treaty of Lunéville, with Austria withdrawing from the war. Napoleon seized the opportunity to attempt to form an anti-British alliance and establish good relations with Russia, but the assassination of Tsar Paul I on March 23 shattered Franco-Russian goodwill, and his successor, Alexander I, became politically pro-British. In December, Napoleon sent his brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, on an expedition to Santo Domingo to suppress a black uprising. On March 25, 1802, France and Britain signed the Treaty of Amiens, ending the Second Coalition War. Britain was required to return almost all the territories acquired in 1793 to France, Spain, and the Republic of Batavia, while French troops withdrew from Naples, Taranto, and the Papal States. However, Britain soon realized its mistake. France had exchanged a small amount of Italian land for its entire overseas empire, while Britain only gained Trinidad and Ceylon. Napoleon's domestic reforms. Catalogue of the Catholic Church. On July 15, 1801, Napoleon and Pope Pius VII signed the Catalogue of the Catholic Church, recognizing Catholicism as the faith of the vast majority of French citizens and resolving the schism between French clergy, believers, and the Roman Catholic Church that had existed since the French Revolution. Napoleon's Code. He initiated a legal reform program, forming a committee with the Second Consul, campesiers, and jurists to integrate 14,000 decrees and laws from various revolutionary governments since 1789, along with 42 local codes, into a single legal system, forming a 493-page code, later known as the Napoleonic Code. This was a pioneering achievement and laid the foundation for the continental legal system. Weights and measures and education. He promoted standard French and implemented the metric system based on kilograms and meters nationwide. He also deeply reformed the government education system, widely establishing public secondary schools. Simultaneously, extensive infrastructure construction was undertaken throughout France. On May 19, 1802, Parliament passed a law establishing the Legion of Honor, with 3,750 prominent figures selected as its first members. On July 14, 1804, the Legion of Honor was first awarded at the ceremony where the remains of national heroes, including Viscount Turenne, were moved to Les Invalides. On August 22, 1802, the 33-year-old Napoleon was declared consul for life of France by the Senate, with the right to appoint his successor. Napoleon's next goal was to rebuild France's overseas empire and wage war against Britain again. He encouraged economic development, establishing chambers of commerce, international trading ports, and guilds. Since colonial economies were a crucial part of foreign trade, he decided to restore the overseas empire, sending troops to suppress the Haitian Revolution, declaring the continuation of slavery on the island of Santo Domingo, and uniting with Spain and the Netherlands to control the Gulf of Mexico. On January 30, 1803, the French newspaper Le Proverbes published General Sebastian's report on his visit to the Levant, claiming that fewer than 10,000 troops could retake Egypt, provoking strong dissatisfaction from Britain. Napoleon's occupation of Switzerland and redrawing of its administrative boundaries led Britain to renege on the Treaty of Amiens, refusing to return Pondicherry to France, the Cape of Good Hope to the Netherlands, and withdrawing its troops from Alexandria in Egypt and Malta. On February 9, Britain announced a suspension of all troop withdrawals unless France explained its actions in Etruria, Switzerland, and the Levant. On March 8, King George III delivered a speech condemning France and demanding the mobilization of troops. On March 11, Napoleon told British Ambassador Whitworth that Britain wanted to go to war with France. Meanwhile, the United States declared that it would support Britain in the war if France continued to occupy Louisiana. With the imminent loss of Santo Domingo, France's most important colony in the Americas, Napoleon decided to sell Louisiana to the United States. On May 18, 1803, Britain declared war on France. Napoleon assembled a massive army to invade England along the coast. The regiment consisted of the Legion headquarters, the Imperial Guard, Soult's 4th Corps, and Lannes' 5th Corps stationed in Boulogne-Maritime, Bernadotte's 1st Corps in Hanover, Marmont's 2nd Corps in Utrecht, Davout's 3rd Corps in Bruges, Ney's 6th Corps in Montreuil, and Augereau's 7th Corps in Bayonne. This legion's quality, mobility, and coordination far surpassed other armies, making it a veritable war machine. During the French military's preparations for war, British politicians actively sought alliances with other countries against France. Napoleon's arbitrary arrest and execution of the Duke of Enghien, who was living abroad, sparked widespread discontent across Europe. This paved the way for Napoleon's rise to the French emperor and the empire's conquests. In 1804, the Senate, due to the numerous assassination attempts Napoleon had faced during his first consulship, proposed establishing a new system to guarantee national stability and the succession of power. On March 28, Napoleon responded, "A single principle of succession can suppress counter-revolution." With public support, the various parliaments agreed to establish the Napoleonic dynasty and selected the title of emperor. On May 18th, the Senate issued a decree bestowing the title of Emperor of France upon First Consul Napoleon. He appointed 6 nobles to form the Imperial Council. Second Consul Jean-Jacques de Campesserres was appointed Grand Chancellor. Third Consul Charles-François Lebrun was appointed Grand Treasurer. Joseph Bonaparte was appointed Elector. Louis Bonaparte was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Household. Eugene de Beauharnais was appointed Chief Minister of State, and Joachim Murat was appointed Admiral of the Navy. After becoming emperor, Napoleon merged the Consulate Guard and the Parliamentary Guard into the Imperial Guard and appointed 18 meritorious generals as marshals of the empire. On August 7th, the referendum results were announced, showing that Napoleon's coronation as emperor had been approved by the French people. The referendum question was, do the people want Napoleon Bonaparte to be Emperor of France and to pass the throne to his family? The official results showed that over 3.57 million people voted in favor, and approximately 2,569 voted against, with a support rate exceeding 99.9%. This referendum directly granted Napoleon the people's mandate to the throne. On December 1st, fearing the government wedding of 1796 was insufficient, Napoleon and Josephine held a Catholic wedding ceremony the day before his coronation. On December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon and Josephine were crowned at Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris. Napoleon used 2 crowns, a golden laurel wreath representing the Roman Empire, and a replica of Charlemagne's coronation crown. He personally held the replica of Charlemagne's crown atop his head, symbolizing his own coronation, and then crowned Josephine. After Mass, he delivered his coronation oath. "I swear to uphold the integrity of the Republic's territory. I swear to respect freedom of religion and the provisions of the Catholic political agreement, to respect equality, political freedom, civil liberties, and the protection of state property. I swear never to impose taxes without legal justification. I swear to uphold the Legion of Honor. I swear to rule only for the benefit, happiness, and glory of the French people." Was Napoleon's imperial throne truly the choice of the French people? Although formally a national referendum, we must understand its historical essence. From the perspective of legitimacy, the national referendum was the most important cornerstone of Napoleon's regime. It cleverly borrowed the principle of popular sovereignty proposed by the French Revolution, portraying individual power as the embodiment of the will of the people. This was more modern and persuasive than the traditional divine right of kings or aristocratic support. However, the referendums in France at that time were not secret ballots. The voting was public, conducted under the supervision of local officials, which brought enormous social and political pressure. The questions in the referendums were not open choices, such as should France be a republic or an empire, but rather a confirmation of established facts. The people could only say yes or no to Napoleon and his family's succession to the throne. From the perspective of propaganda and control, the government completely controlled public opinion, portraying Napoleon as the defender of peace, order, and the achievements of the revolution, while the empire was depicted as a necessary means to protect these achievements. Looking back today, we must understand the true basis of public opinion at the time. Napoleon did indeed possess extremely high prestige. He ended the chaos of the later stages of the revolution, brought domestic stability, promulgated the Napoleonic Code, won the loyalty of the army, allowed the bourgeoisie and peasants to retain the property gained during the revolution, and preserved the lives of the old aristocracy. Many people valued stability and order more than abstract freedom, so the referendum results reflected a considerable degree of genuine public support. Therefore, Napoleon's title of emperor was legally generated through a national referendum. This formally conformed to the principles of the French Revolution and was an important practice of modern, citizen referendum in granting power. However, its essence was a strictly controlled and guided confirmation of public opinion. designed to provide an undisputed democratic authorization for Napoleon's personal autocracy and hereditary imperial power. This method became a model for many subsequent authoritarian or dictatorial regimes. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. I am your time navigator, Lawrence. Let's explore the truth of history together. Learning from others can help us understand our own gains and losses. Learning from history can help us understand the rise and fall of dynasties. I hope today's sharing will give you a new understanding of Napoleon's life. Let us work together for world civilization and peace. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with more history enthusiasts. In the next episode, we'll explore how the French Revolution reshaped the modern world, so stay tuned.